Too many people choose a career path out of fear disguised as practicality. That's from Jim Carrey. It's so important that I'll say it again. Too many people choose a career path out of fear disguised as practicality. This could have been an easy justification for my next guest on this episode, Adam Riley. Coming from humble beginnings and after qualifying as a chartered accountant, it would have been understandable for Adam to follow the path most traveled. Instead, he co-founded Rockjumper birding tours in 1998, and he hasn't looked back. He has seen roughly 80% of the world's bird species. That is over 8,000 birds. We discussed the highlights of his professional career in the Antarctic, being caught during a military coup in the Ivory Coast, tribal warfare in Ethiopia, and rebel threats in far-reaching, unknown places and corners of the earth, all in the name of avian adventures. My takeaway? It's very simple. Take a bloody risk, man. Enjoy. Adam Riley, thank you very much for coming on. I look forward to having all my guests on. But I must say I've been thinking about this one for a while with particular interest because judging from your background and the research that I've done, I have a sneaky suspicion that you've got some very interesting stories to share with your extensive travels, which we're going to get into. But first of all, I start the same with every episode is, how are you today?
Hi, Clinton. Great to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I'm good. Just back from traveling and getting back into the swing of things at home. So great to be in South Africa.
Good. Why are you good?
Why am I good? I'm happy. Life is good. A lot of things have come together, and I'm really enjoying this particular period in my life.
That's fantastic. And it's something that is often taken for granted, just being happy. So that's very good. I'm glad things are going well for you. So just to give some background to our listeners, in my research, you studied to become a CA, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct. I did qualify as a CA.
Yeah, you qualified as a CA, and then you took a completely different turn in your career. So give some context to, first of all, your studies, how you came up, and then what led to the transition to the path that you're on today.
Cool, yeah. So I grew up mostly in Pietermaritzburg and didn't get very far from there. I'm still in Hilton. I've been in that area most of my life. And I came from a family that wasn't wealthy at all. And growing up, I decided I definitely didn't want to be poor. So I did fairly well in academia and decided, okay, what I'd heard is the best way to not be poor was to become a chartered accountant. So that was my goal, and in Standard 8, was grade 6 now? Grade 10, yeah, they changed things around. Grade 10, you had to make all your choices of your subjects for the future, for matric, and I cut out all science options. I did, geography was the science, we had to do one of the sciences, and mathematics and accounting. And I was all set to become an accountant after studying through varsity. And at that time in my life, I also was introduced to bird watching. And at that stage back then, it was not that popular. And I really got into it, and I loved doing it, but I didn't ever consider it as a potential career. So I went through, I did my BCom honors, wrote my board exams, did articles with KPMG in Pietermaritzburg. And sort of 2 years into my articles, I realized that life behind a desk really wasn't how I wanted to live the rest of my life. And at that stage, I'd got more and more into birding, was doing it most weekends, all my holidays. I'd been on 1 or 2 overseas trips. And it was just such a great passion of mine. And a good buddy of mine, Jonathan Rousseau, had recently qualified as a medical doctor. And we started chatting, and we said, well, let's maybe put our careers on hold for a year or two and start a little company, take people bird watching, have some fun, see a bit of the world, and then go back to our respective careers. And that was in 1998, and we launched Rockjumper birding tours. And 25 years down the line now, that's pretty much what I still do. I haven't quite got back to any other career. I still feel like I'm playing, and life hasn't really got real yet. But it's been an amazing adventure, and I've had some fun times, and fortunately grown Rockjumper into quite a successful business.
That's wonderful. It's so nice to hear somebody who's been able to make the conversion of a passion into a career. So what's the story behind Rockjumper? How did you get to that name?
So originally we were thinking mostly just Africa, and Rockjumper is a species of bird. There's two of them. They only occur in South Africa and Lesotho, and they're probably one of the most sought after birds in this country. So for a lot of foreigners coming to Africa, Rockjumper is one of the key birds that they want to see. So we named it after that, which in retrospect isn't really the best name. I mean, a lot of people get confused with our name and think we do abseiling, or they don't really know what we do. But we didn't get around to changing it, and by the time our brand was really well known, it was too late to change it. So there we are. Rockjumper Worldwide Birding Adventures is kind of our byline.
Yes, that is so cool. So I'm interested to hear, because I've heard a couple of stories where somebody takes a passion and they make a career out of it. And what I've heard sometimes is then the passion starts to reduce, because it then becomes more like a job and you lose the romance of the passion. Has that happened to you to some extent, or are you still like a kid in the candy store and you can't wait to get out there?
Yeah, no, definitely. It hasn't happened to me. I've been very fortunate with that. I must have got some sort of collecting gene in me. So even as a kid, I was really into collecting coins and stamps, and I still collect coins actually, and I collect books, and I also love nature. So birding is actually a beautiful combination of collecting and a love for nature, because you have this list of 11,000 bird species that occur around the world, and you go out there and you try to see as many of those as possible. There's many ways of birding, but that way is an extremely popular way of birding. So you don't have to take the whole world. You can just take South Africa or KZN or whatever and choose, okay, you want to see this many species. And you collect each one by seeing it or photographing it. So for me, that ticking is a really important part of what I do. But at the same time, I love nature and the birds and the travel and adventure and seeing them. So as I've traveled to more and more countries, I've seen more birds, and then you realize what you haven't seen, and you want to go and experience and see those. So that part of it hasn't worn off for me. At one stage, I felt I was guiding too much, and you can get burnout on the actual guiding aspect of it.
Yeah.
So I did cut back quite severely on the guiding, and even more so once I had a family and kids at home. So I only guide 1 or 2 tours a year now, but I do travel 5 or 6 times internationally, usually a year, and just have fun and explore places and look at birds.
Very cool. How does the list work? Because I was doing some research, and then you've got this list, which is almost like there's an air of mystery about it. It's like people have gone around the world and they've gone to see these different species, and I can imagine it to be quite an obsessive thing to get to that next view, tick that next species off the list. So how does one go about entering onto that list? What counts as a sighting? How does that work exactly?
So, it's a very personal journey, and like for instance, I don't actually even know exactly what my number is. Mm-hmm. Other people are fanatical about knowing the exact number, and they keep up with the latest taxonomy. So there's actually at least 3 current bird lists that are all quite different for the whole world. So what a species isn't actually a natural biological definition or delineation. It's a human-made delineation. So a bunch of scientists say, this is a species, and this isn't, and we lump those ones, or we split those ones, and then they create a list of all the birds or animals or whatever. And as I say, there's 3 major international bird lists, and they range between sort of 10,000 and 11,000 species now. So people generally will choose a particular list that they want to follow, and then we'll go out and try to see as many birds on that list. So that's one way of birding. There's many other ways of enjoying birds. There are international websites where you can list how many species you've seen, and the competition at the top can be pretty intense. Also, there's no rewards, and there are certain people on that list who do make up sightings, or who kind of believe they've seen something that they probably haven't. But you soon get a reputation, and everyone will say, oh, that guy's number X, but we know he's probably seen 10% less than what he's actually listing. But so you really damage yourself by doing that rather than winning anything. Yeah. But many birders also don't care about a list at all, and that's absolutely fine. That's the wonderful thing about birding. You can sit in your garden and just look at the birds that come in, not need to know their names, all the way through to trying to see every bird in the world and know every single thing about it.
Mm. How many different species of bird have you seen yourself, approximately?
Approximately, I'm somewhere between 8 and 8,500 of the world's 11,000 odd.
Wow. So that's close on 80% of the world's birds.
Yeah, round about there.
Round about there.
Yeah.
And just to put some context for the listeners, so when I was doing my research and I looked at the lists and what the numbers were, on the particular list that I saw, that would put you in the top 50 in the world.
Yeah, it probably is around there, but that's not really what I've chosen to pursue. If I'd really wanted to see a very high number, I would have focused on that.
Yeah.
And instead I've focused on different things in my life. A good friend of mine is actually the number 1 lister, and he's just so focused on seeing every single bird and goes to extreme effort to seeing new things, whereas I'm a little bit more holistic in what I do. I've got into photography, and I'm traveling a fair amount with my family as well, which really limits how much you can see. But yeah, I've just been fortunate to have had the opportunity to go to a lot of places and see a lot of birds and other wildlife as well.
I read an article, and it was a wonderful quote. It said, to a bird watcher, one glimpse, one moment is happiness enough. So what lengths have you gone to get that glimpse of a particular species? And like you mentioned, your friend who's number 1, I'd imagine he has gone to some extreme lengths.
Yeah, he has indeed, and I think anyone who's traveled extensively has done some crazy things to see some birds. So one of the things that I've focused on seeing is to try to see one representative of every bird family in the world. So no one's ever going to see all 11,000 bird species. It's virtually impossible. Well, it is impossible. Some haven't been seen for 150 years, and 160 of those are extinct. But of the 11,000 birds, they're divided into 254 bird families. So like kingfishers and sunbirds and so on. They're each their own family, and there's many species within those family groups. There's other family groups where there's just one species, such as hammerkorp. So if you get to see all these 254 bird families, you've really seen the great diversity of the world's birds. So that's what I chose to do rather than chase extreme numbers, which I found a little less rewarding. So just as an example, I went to Sulawesi, where there's a little bird called a halocitria.
Where's that?
Sulawesi is an island in Indonesia.
Okay.
And you don't get too many tourists going there, but it's a really fascinating island with amazing wildlife. And I only had 2 bird families left at the time. I've actually just finally seen my last one last month in Australia.
Well done. Congratulations, eh?
Thank you, yeah.
Yeah.
It's been a fun goal, and I'm actually planning to write a book about my adventures searching for these bird families. So this Hylocytria lives in the mountain rainforest of Sulawesi, and we'd been traveling around and eventually got to the area where it occurs, but you got to walk this incredibly difficult trail up to an old abandoned mine. And we stayed at this very basic hotel, no running water, etc. And we woke up early, like 4 in the morning, because you had to get police clearance to walk this trail. And our guide went to get the police clearance and came back with a huge frown on his face. He said, "No, there's been recent rebel activity. There was a rebel group. There were actually wanted posters for them all over the place. And their snipers had been seen on this trail. And this was our only day to get this bird." And it's like, whoa. So we didn't do the trail for a few hours, and then about 8, 9 o'clock we went back to the police station and said, "Have there been any more sightings of these snipers or anyone on this trail?" And they said, "No, but we still don't think it's entirely safe." And we explained to them why we really wanted to walk this trail to look for this bird, and they said, "Okay, they'll give us a police guard, but it's at our own risk if we walk this trail." And so we did it.
Yeah.
And always when you're in a situation like that, like hiking in Angola, where there's lots of landmines, things become a bit more real. Every step is a little adventure. And really fortunately, we found this bird along the trail, and just had a brilliant day hiking this trail nevertheless, and obviously returned safely. So that's just one of many more recent stories.
Crikey Moses, man. So then when you saw the bird for the first time on that particular hike, did you guys see the bird and then, okay, cool, pack it in, we're going back? Or did you keep going?
No, we turned around
Okay.
after finding the bird. Although it took a few hours to get up there. But there were a lot of other cool birds on the trail as well. So we spent most of the day on the trail, coming back slowly.
I wanted to come back to something you said about the Hamerkop. It's in one family.
Yeah,
its own family.
So it's called a monotypic family. So there's just one species in the family. So in other words, it doesn't have any close relatives. It's evolved within its own family a very long time ago, and there's no sister species.
Really?
Yeah, so it's
and that's native to Southern Africa?
It occurs throughout sub-Saharan Africa and Madagascar.
That's very cool. Are they seasonal? Do they come, or
They're generally resident.
Okay,
They
so
build those giant stick nests that you
Yes.
sometimes see in the fork of a big tree.
There we go. Something we didn't know. We can keep that in mind when we see one next.
Yeah, it's a very cool bird.
Yeah, it is. So, tell me, why birds? What's the appeal to birds specifically? Because there's lots of nature lovers, but why has that specifically become a passion of yours?
I think birds are very popular, and it's actually become really mainstream in the last 20 years throughout the world. Apparently in the USA, it's the second biggest outdoor activity after gardening is birding. And the reason I believe why birds are more popular than sort of mammals and butterflies and things like that is humans kind of sense mostly with their vision and their ears, so sight and hearing. And birds also communicate and are basically in those same two spheres as a large part of how they see and behave in the world. So they're colorful, they make beautiful songs, whereas mammals are generally not very colorful. 90% of mammal species are little shrews and rodents that are nocturnal, and you've got to look at their teeth structure to actually separate the species. So for someone who's trying to see every single mammal species in the world, you'll see all the big characteristic larger mammals, but then once you start getting into bats and shrews and rodents, it becomes a lot more difficult. And even though they're more closely related to us as humans, we have less resonance. than we do with these beautiful birds that sing and are mostly diurnal and show off these colors. So I think that's one of the reasons why birding is really popular. And also, most bird species are fairly straightforward to identify if you put a bit of effort into sort of learning the difference between the species. And it gets you to travel. So a large part of birding is going to areas you wouldn't go to otherwise. Takes you to remote forests or beaches and places that you wouldn't go to if you're just traveling to Australia or wherever. And you have lots of adventures and see amazing wildernesses in the process of trying to find all these different bird species.
Fantastic. How many countries have you been to? Do you know?
I don't know the exact number. It's over 100 countries.
Really? Spanning over a time period of, what I imagine, since 98, more or less?
So I've started traveling a little bit before that, but certainly 98 is when I went full-time into this and have been traveling around the world.
You've developed and grown a very successful business, as you mentioned, that's allowed you to travel and to have the lifestyle that you want to live with your family now. You've gone to over 100 different countries, and you keep coming back here. You keep coming back to South Africa. What does that mean? You must have had an opportunity to go elsewhere. Why do you keep coming back here?
You can't beat South Africa. I truly believe it's the best country in the world to live in. Just amazing quality of life, the beautiful environment. A friend of mine puts it really well, actually. He says we live a champagne lifestyle on beer money. So I don't think there's anywhere else in the world where you could live a lifestyle like many of us do live in South Africa, with the sort of income that we do generate. Just wonderful people. It's great to be also in an area that you're familiar with. Especially when I was traveling a lot, I could have based myself anywhere. And I actually ended up basing myself in Pietermaritzburg because I was traveling sort of at least 10 months of the year. And it was great to come back for a week or 2 days or 5 days or whatever, know a bunch of people, can go out, have fun. I knew where to get anything sorted out there. I needed to get sorted out, fixed between trips, and then move on to the next trip again. So familiarity is really important in friendships. I think moving to another country, and most of my family have emigrated, is a very stressful process, and you got to basically start from zero again with friendships and knowing your environment. So I've just stayed. Pietermaritzburg area has some of the best schools in the country, and once we were married and had kids, we decided to stay there as well for the educational aspect of it.
Okay. You mentioned that you were traveling 10 months of the year. Was this when you had a family?
No, this was before I had a family. Yeah, okay. This was in the early days of Rockjumper.
Okay.
The first 5 or 6 years when I was really establishing the business and constantly checking out new destinations and setting up new tours and guiding the first tours to each destination, which is always the hardest ones when you're dealing with teething problems and so on. And that's the stage where I ended up sort of burning out a bit on the guiding aspect.
Okay.
And then as the business grew, I started cutting back actually on the amount of time I spent on tour and focused more on the business itself. And then, as the business grew, I started, employing people more in senior roles and management and so on. And eventually, basically decided that I didn't want to be that involved in the business anymore, and I was confident enough in my management team to actually hand the business over to my management team. So I did that in 2019. Although I still own the business, I'm now more involved in the periphery and more in innovation and other sort of businesses and conservation work that's really piqued my interest in the last few years.
Good. I'm glad that you mentioned conservation because I'm going to come to that in a second. But something that you said there just has piqued my interest. So you would go, over that stint when you were traveling extensively, would you go into a place, do a kind of a recce, like yourself and your business partner, and then decide, okay, cool, this is how we see this type of tour being coordinated? So you would always go over there first and then see what the potential is, and then come back and then be like, okay, cool, this is what we're going to punt.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'd always check out a country, work out the best places to find birds and nature, check out the best hotels, work out itineraries. And we had really great clients. Like, for instance, one of the cool stories, I had this group of Americans I used to travel with every year. And during the tour, we talk about where they wanted to go next year. And this was back in the early days. They said to us, no, we heard Ghana is a really great destination for birding. We'd like to go there next year. And I was like, I've never heard of anyone going to Ghana for birding. And they said, no, we heard it's good and we want to go. So I said, okay, fine. So my buddy David Hodnott and I, we flew up to Ghana, spent about a month traveling around, checking everything out, working out with the national parks where we could go, and did some amazing exploration. And we set up this tour for them. It was the first birding tour ever in Ghana. And we set it up, and they were coming out in a couple of months' time. And I get an email from them saying, oh, we see, another tour company is also offering a tour to Ghana. Is it sort of similar? And that's when I realized the whole time they meant the Gambia, which is a popular birding destination. And they just got the name wrong. And I said, you mean the Gambia, but we're going to Ghana. It's going to be the first tour ever there. And we're going to have a great time. And we did have a great time. And we've probably run 200 or 300 tours to Ghana. And it's actually now a major birding destination in Africa.
So you're accidental pioneers, eh?
Exactly.
It's funny how it works that way.
Yeah.
A little bit of luck sometimes goes a long way. So over 100 countries, this is like blowing my mind a little bit just to get my head around it. You must have seen so many things in these remote places. And there must also be a level of expectation, like preconceived notion of what you think a place might be like. Can you think of a place that has surprised you, that was nothing like what you thought you were going to go see?
Well, your first time in the Amazon is always just an incredible experience. And I was lucky to, at one stage, spend 5 months down in the Amazon and get to know it really, really well.
Wow.
In Ecuador. And just the sheer biodiversity of that part of the world far exceeded my expectations.
Really?
So that, there's just so much life down there. And although, your first walk, you don't see that much, then as you spend time and learn the sounds and how to find different things, you pick up more and more and more. And even after 5 months, walking the same trails, you keep seeing new things. It's a magical part of the world that's sadly being quite badly degraded. Another place that's just like nowhere else in the world is Ethiopia, and I've been traveling to Ethiopia for quite a long time. When we first started going there, it was incredibly underdeveloped, real wildernesses, tribal people still living sort of almost Stone Age existences, or Iron Age anyway. And we've had some amazing experiences in Ethiopia over the years.
The Amazon. Did you ever feel...
No, not in the Amazon. I've felt unsafe in a couple of other places, but no, not in the Amazon.
So, not necessarily from a human influence. Has there ever been any encounters that were where you thought, okay, well, this could go sideways quite quickly? Obviously Africa with this big game. I mean, we've been chased by ellies and rhinos and walked into lions and things like that. But yeah, I've been fortunate not to have had any really bad incident in my travels. And wildlife-wise, on our tours, we had someone kicked down by an ostrich once. That's probably the closest we've had to something significant happening. Yeah, well, that's pretty good going, I would say, to the destinations that you travel to. So you mentioned that there were times when you did feel unsafe. Apart from the story that you've shared with me already, what else comes to mind?
We've had some times in Ethiopia where we've had sort of tribal warfare and you kind of get stuck in the middle of it. I was in Ivory Coast guiding a tour when they had a coup there, and it took us about 4 or 5 days to get out, and we had some pretty scary encounters there. But for the most part, we have really good people on the ground in these different countries who ensure that you stay as safe as possible. I mean, another destination where things can go sideways pretty quickly is Papua New Guinea. It's still very tribal warfare can pick up really fast there. We've been there during some election times where it was a bit hairy. Yeah, I've been very fortunate that nothing serious has happened, and long may it stay that way.
Is there a part of you that enjoys that chaos?
Yeah, very much so. I love organizing things. So, for instance, as I mentioned, I only do a couple of tours a year now, even 1 or 2. And I like to choose the ones with really difficult logistics. Like, for instance, we do tours for the American Birding Association, where we have up to 120 people in the group. And that's just a lot of logistics, making sure that runs smoothly. We break everyone up into small groups during the day and get back together in the evening. And I love trips like that, where you working yourself to the bone and everyone's having a great time. And at the end, you send everyone away safely and you just say, wow, that was a great experience for everyone and for yourself.
Speaking of great experiences, is there a time in your career that stands out to you as being the most rewarding? It could be on a personal front where maybe it's a particular species that you've noticed. It could be that story you alluded to earlier. It could be none of those two.
Wow. Yeah, so, there's always ups and downs in business. So probably the most rewarding thing for me was something that happened in November last year. So as our business grew, we started sending people to Antarctica, small groups. It's a really expensive trip. And eventually we built up the business to an extent where we felt we could charter a whole ship to Antarctica, which is a really expensive thing, a couple of $1 million, etc. And we've been working with a Canadian company since they started. We've been 10, 12-year relationship with them, and they've been great. And we chartered a ship and sent all our best clients on this trip. And this was in October 2019. It was the first trip of the season. And first sort of hint of trouble was a day before, or 2 days before the trip. They said their ship's running late. And there was a bit of a problem, so we basically, everyone was in this very southern tip of South America to get down to Antarctica, so we actually had to charter an airplane to get them up to Buenos Aires so they could get on the ship the same day they were supposed to get onto it. And they were supposed to pay for that and didn't, so eventually we paid $70,000 for that charter. And then everyone got on the ship and we thought, okay, great, this is going to end of the drama. And then instead of going to Falklands, which was the first stop, they pulled into a port in Ushuaia. And we're like, what's going on? And they're like, no, we had trouble getting fuel. And they sat around there. And then eventually they said to us, no, actually we're in serious financial trouble. And we're calling the trip off. So we had 120 of our best clients on the ship and all looking forward to an experience of a lifetime. And basically, we sailed them back to Ushuaia and to Buenos Aires, and they disembarked. And that's been by far the most traumatic and difficult experience I've ever had in my life. So our team worked endlessly for sort of 24 hours setting up tours for all 120 of these people for the balance of the 2.5 weeks that they were still supposed to be on the ship, and we at least gave them a really cool tour experience around Argentina and Brazil. And we lost all our money on that trip, and we'd already paid a deposit for the next year and so on. So in 2020, we chartered with another company, and we we're going to get all these people to have their dream trip to Antarctica. And obviously, COVID happened. So the trip was cancelled in 2020. We chartered again in 21, and again COVID. So finally, in 2022, we ended up chartering 1.5 ships. So we took a part charter on another one, and we took all our clients down to Antarctica. We had an amazing time. One of the most difficult birds to see is called the emperor penguin. You see many species of penguins in Antarctica, but the emperor itself breeds in very remote, inaccessible areas of Antarctica, where generally you need to get sort of a nuclear icebreaker and helicopters to get out to guarantee a sighting of it. But we'd planned this trip right at the beginning of the season, where there's sometimes a couple of them sort of lurking around the more accessible areas of Antarctica, but it was maybe a 20-30% chance of seeing it. And we'd marketed the trip around, best potential chance of seeing this bird, and we're going to put in extra effort into seeing it. And both our trips saw emperor penguin, which I'd never seen before as well, so it was a new bird or a lifer for me. And we had 2 incredibly successful trips. All our clients got great experiences with emperor and walking in amongst colonies of 500,000 king penguins and albatrosses and all that. So to actually have survived both the bankruptcy of that supplier and COVID, and to eventually get all these people down and have this experience of a lifetime that I've been so looking forward to for a few years, I would say, really a high point in my career.
What a very cool story, Adam, hey? It's perseverance and 3 years in the making. And were those people that were on the 2019 debacle, were most of those the same group of clients that were on there?
Most of them were on the ship, yeah.
Okay. Yes, that's so cool, eh? That is so cool. Tell me a little bit about sighting and because how much knowledge and how much research goes into sighting, because it's not something as simple as like identifying a mammal, for example. You've got male, female, juvenile, which could all look very different. So how much research goes into having the knowledge to identify a bird from being on the ground versus being in the air, for example?
So funnily enough, with birding, you start off by kind of looking at birds and getting a field guide and trying to figure out the features. Once you get to a more advanced level, you actually you don't use your eyes as much, you use your ears. Okay. So the most important part of more advanced birding is actually the calls. And that's how we find most of the birds on our tours. So we basically will walk down a forest trail or wherever we are, and we'll listen for a particular target species. And then when we hear that bird, we'll do our best to either record its call and attract it back in for the group to view it, or other ways of trying to see that bird, be it walking a little bit off the trail and getting a view of it. So calls are really critical. The guides that we hire, we ensure that no one's going to know the whole world, but they need to know one area really, really well. So be it even just Zululand or whatever, we'll take them out and we'll ensure that they know every single call, they know every single bird by instant identification. And once they have that skill, as well as other soft skills such as caring for people and entertaining them and so on, then it's quite easy for us to train them to be able to guide in New Guinea or Madagascar or wherever, even if they've never been there. But they really need to know one area really well. So you do definitely have to spend time in the field and get to know your birds and wildlife.
So getting to know birds and wildlife, you wrote a book.
Yeah, I did.
How was that process? You had that book published. It's Birds of Southern Africa?
Yeah, Birds of South Africa with Bloomsbury, Helm Wildlife Guides. So it was a bit of a COVID project. I was contacted by the publishers from the UK whether I would be interested in doing this field guide as part of a series that they're doing for many countries around the world. And it's the commonest and most prominent 350 species of a country. So it's, the sort of Robert's birds of Southern Africa has nearly 1,000 species in it. And for a beginner birder or a tourist coming to the country who doesn't want to try wade through 1,000 species to figure out what they've seen, a guide with just the 350 commonest birds is a lot more helpful. So this is what it was about, or who it's aimed for. And when they first contacted me, I thought, well, it's reasonably easy to write sort of a paragraph on each species and how to identify it and where to find it. And it would also be very easy for me to get photos from all my buddies, a lot of buddies who are excellent photographers. But let me make it a challenge and actually take all the photos myself for this field guide. So that was a really cool project during COVID, because in the past I generally only photograph the male of the species, or the more attractive one. Sometimes it's a female in some species. And we use it for our website and our brochure and so on. But now I had to go out and photograph female sunbirds or widows and weavers in non-breeding plumage, etc., for this book. So it was really fun during COVID to have a mission like that to populate this book with cool photos.
Very nice. Tell me, the conservation. We touched on it earlier, but there's a conservation element to your business. What is that about? How does it work?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you got to help conserve what you love. And right since when we first started, we've always donated part of our profits to conservation. And we've supported some amazing projects over the years. And now, since I left my business as a full-time job, a lot of what I focus on is conservation work. So besides supporting really great organizations like BirdLife International and BirdLife South Africa, I'm on several boards and other conservation organizations. So a few examples. One of the species that I'm really passionate about is a very obscure and cryptic species that's critically endangered, which is essentially one step away from extinction, called the white-winged flufftail. And many, many years ago, a friend of mine, Dean Kutsia, who's now passed away, saw that this bird was in very serious trouble, so he started a foundation to look after it. At that stage, it was only known to breed in one or two spots in Ethiopia, and it then pitched up in South Africa during the summer months, but again only at a few locations, including a private marsh called Middelpunt, which was being drained at the time. So they went and leased this marsh and restored it back to its pristine state. And they went also to Ethiopia, and the final site that hadn't been destroyed, because there's very high population density in Ethiopia. They went to the village next to the marsh and said, listen, if you guys protect this marsh for the few months that the bird is here and breeding, we'll build a school for you. So even back then, we donated and helped them build the school. And now this marsh is protected, and there's about 30 breeding pairs there. And it was always assumed that the Ethiopian birds sort of migrated to South Africa, but in the last few years, we've actually discovered that they breed in South Africa as well. So at this stage, there's only two confirmed existing breeding sites, one in Ethiopia, one in South Africa, and they're both protected by this organization. And they both would have been gone if it wasn't for this Middelpunt Wetland Trust.
Why was their species under threat?
So it breeds in marshes, and in Ethiopia in particular, the marshes were all drained for cultivation. Okay. It occurs on the high elevation plateau north of Addis Ababa, which is just millions of people living up there. In South Africa as well, our wetlands are under severe threat, and a lot of wetlands have been drained. The call of the species has only actually also recently been discovered, and using that now, we are starting to find a few more locations where it occurs, which is really, really exciting.
What wonderful work, and very necessary work. Do you have any other success stories that you can share as a result of your conservation efforts?
So I'm also on the advisory group for BirdLife International. So we do BirdLife International does some incredible conservation work. It's a organization that basically has branches in over 120 countries around the world, doing really, really critical conservation work. So it's really fun having a sort of advisory role there. And then the other organization that I'm involved in is the Zululand Conservation Trust, and they run Manyoni Game Reserve in Zululand and do a lot of community work around the reserve. But the reason I joined the trust and where I'm hoping to have the biggest influence is actually with endangered species range expansion. So what we're hoping to do down the line is to link up as many of the public and private game reserves in Zululand into one large contiguous reserve, where we're able to have much higher numbers of wild dogs and elephants and rhinos, etc. So working with community land as well as state and local provincial land and all the private game reserves. So we're already making really exciting progress in dropping fences with some of our neighboring properties to make the reserves much bigger up there. So I think that'll be an amazing legacy to create a huge sort of greater Zululand biosphere reserve that stretches from Babanango all the way up to Eswatini on both sides of the freeway and open to large game migration.
Yeah, see, that is so exciting. I really, really hope you can get that right. Tell me, in your experience and in your travels and with the information that you're privy to being on all these different boards, have you noticed a change in the climate, and how, if so, how has it affected the ecosystems that you're aware of, and also maybe something like migration of different birds?
Yeah, I mean, I've been traveling, as I said, extensively since 1998, and I've seen vast areas that were wildernesses that now are agricultural land, and in some cases even cities, where before we were seeing sort of big game and just unbroken rainforests and things like that. So it has been absolutely tragic seeing the world change. But I think for a lot of the world now, there's a very strong, or a much stronger conservation drive than there ever has been, and there's major efforts abroad to try and mitigate some of these environmental disasters that are happening. Global warming, is without a doubt happening. As I said, I was in Antarctica in November last year, and even at one of the huge penguin colonies, the glacier is, I was last there in 2008 at that colony, and the glacier has probably moved back maybe 3/4 of a kilometer in those sort of 12, 13 years since I'd been there. So it's definitely happening. We do quite a lot in around Spitsbergen, up in the Arctic, and it's really, really different to how it was over the last decade. There's also, extreme weather. I think that's part of this global warming, which often causes really severe environmental effects, huge floods and droughts and things like that across the world. So it's really critical now that as a species we try to protect what is remaining, and as much as possible also try to recover some of what's been lost. So for instance, there's one particular project I'm looking at in Brazil where they're actually rewilding Amazon land that's been or reforesting Amazon land that's been cleared. There's literally millions of hectares of cleared Amazon land that's almost of no use anymore. So they're planting forests back into it, and to finance that, they're using carbon credits and also growing sort of high value products like coffee and cocoa on parts of the land. So those are really great projects that we try to support and invest in as well. So yeah, there definitely has been changes, and but I'm positive about the future. This new international effort to try get 30% of land protected by 2030 is really, really exciting, and there's some big funding towards projects that feed into that goal.
Can you elaborate on that project and that goal?
Yeah, so it came out of one of the recent international COP conferences, and the goal is basically to try have 30% of the planet's surface protected by 2030. So we're hoping to, like for instance with the Zululand project, we're hoping to be able to tap into some of these funds available through this international funding to be able to get more of the community land that's surrounding these nature reserves, and then being able to link up these game reserves, and as well as obviously would be renting land from the communities and employing communities to help protect the land and the wildlife that gets reintroduced back onto these areas that are being rewilded. For instance, there's a wonderful project at Babanango. It was funded by a German conservationist, and they've basically taken two small reserves and linked them up into larger than a 20,000 hectare reserve, mostly with community land, and it's just such a great success story. Over 200 community members are now employed where previously they wouldn't have been, and it's an absolutely stunning reserve. So that sort of idea and expanding that through much of Zululand.
So that vision of 30% protected land, that would be an improvement upon what is the current situation now?
Yeah, I don't know what the current situation is now. I guess it's probably less than 10% is formally protected across the planet. So yeah, it means a huge amount of land hopefully is going to be set aside for conservation.
Okay. So to your knowledge and with the information that you have at your disposal, do you think that there's reason to be optimistic about the future?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I think mindset has changed in a lot of countries, and there's a lot more awareness for conservation. I think we're seeing a lot of negative effects of the deforestation and environmental degradation that has happened, and people and countries and leaders are realizing, even in China and places like that, are realizing the importance of protecting natural areas and watersheds and forestry land and even the oceans.
That's a lovely positive note to finish on, Adam. Thank you very much for coming on. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule. For the listeners, where can people find you? On Instagram, for example, a website for Rockjumper to follow you and your conservation efforts?
Yeah, great. So I'm not too prevalent on social media myself personally, but our Rockjumper Birding Tours is there, so you can find our website on rockjumper.com. We're also on Facebook and Instagram, etc. You can also look up the Zululand Conservation Trust and Manyoni Game Reserve and the work we're doing up there, Middelpunt Wetland Trust, and BirdLife International is a great organization to support as well. BirdLife South Africa would be who to look for to get into that organization.
Awesome. Adam, thank you very much.
Thank you, Clinton. It's been great chatting.
Pleasure. Ciao.